to my channel. In today's video, we are making another card. So I have here the PinkFresh Studio DHALIA stamp, die, and stencil bundle. It does have washi tape, but I don't have that. I typically don't buy the washi tape, but that's just me. But that is an option if you so choose. This is one entire stamp, so it has all these floral images and it also had the sentiments, but it would not fit in my stamp pocket, so I did snip off the sentiments. I kept those intact. Those are individual stamps themselves, but all of these florals are one. So in order to get this to fit into my regular size MISTI, I put this at an angle. And what I did is I put the stamped image, the stamping part of it face down, and tilted it into my MISTI so that it would fit, and then I put the door on it. And this sticks fine, and this way I can get the whole image on my paper. My paper is going to hang off, but that's okay. So I'm going to lay my paper over the top of this and try to get as much of that stamped image on there as possible, and then I'm going to flip the base of my MISTI over to attach that paper. And as you can see, my paper does hang over, but that's not going to affect my stamp image at all. So I'm just making sure that my stamp is indeed stuck to the door, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that sticky mat is in that bottom right corner so that when I go to stamp, everything's fine. My color inspiration came from this volume 1 color cube, and that is card number 485, if I'm not mistaken. Excuse me, 458. I have some Distress Oxide inks today in KITSCH Flamingo, Picked Raspberry, Ground Espresso, Gathered Twigs, and Tea Dye. Those colors seem to match that color inspiration fairly well, and I wanted to use my Distress Oxides today. I was going to do some ink blending on the background, but I was kind of crunched for time, and so you'll see what I do later on for my background for this card. First things first, these stencils are, again, all one piece. So another way to kind of save time and material, so cut down on cost. I appreciate that PinkFresh does this. These are numbered and they have registration marks etched into them, but I don't necessarily follow the numbers that they're in. I kind of do what makes sense for me, and what makes sense for me is to go ahead and stamp the image, and then I do the leaves first because that has like the most area. So I do the leaves first, and in order to bring in the black color from our color inspiration, I'm going to stamp these images in Gina K Obsidian ink. If you've watched a couple of my previous videos, I was doing some alcohol marker coloring with this ink and having some kind of mixed results with it. So I'm bringing it back in today just because I didn't want to sit there and let my pigment ink, my VersaFine Onyx Black pigment ink, dry forever. I do end up heat setting this too, but I wish I would have left my paper on this mat, but I didn't. Whenever you use a pigment ink over your stamped image, it's going to kind of cloud or change the color of the ink that you put on top of it unless you put like some sort of embossing powder over it to resist that ink. I didn't worry about that today. I wish I would have left this paper on the sticky mat so that I could go back and stamp this again and kind of darken up those lines, but I didn't. I do stamp this a couple of times. But back to those stencils. So I do them in an order that makes sense to me, and I usually start with whatever has the most area. So in this case, it's the leaves. There is a lot of leaves, and so I start with the most open layer of the leaves, and then I do the detail layer, and then I do the most open layer of the flowers, and the flowers come in two different sets. There's one that does like the big flowers and a few of the buds, and then another one that does more of the buds and their detail layers. So in my mind, it made more sense to do the leaves first and their detail layer and then kind of work from there. The leaves I'm going to do in the pink. So here I'm showing you there's a a defect in this stamp that I have. And so I just took a Paper Studio multi-liner in 0.1 millimeter and just colored in those lines, and no one will ever know that there was a defect in my stamp. I'm sure I could have gone back to PinkFresh Studio and said, hey, there's a defect with my stamp, sent them a picture and showed them, and they probably would have sent me a new one. I just never did that, and this is just kind of my workaround. So if you're using a pigment ink, leave your stamp on that sticky mat so that you can go back and either stamp with a darker ink or heat emboss or something like that, not unless that kind of dulling of those lines doesn't bother you. So I wanted to do kind of a different color combination. So I am actually doing the leaves in pink. This is my card, so I can do what I want, right? Right. So I'm doing my leaves in pink. So this is KITSCH Flamingo. This is the lightest color of my pinks. And then the picked raspberry really matches that pink from our color inspiration quite well. So I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm doing very like flat ink blending. I am going clockwise and counterclockwise, just making sure I'm getting into all these nooks and crannies, but I'm not doing anything fancy with my ink blending here. So because I'm not doing anything fancy, I am going to speed this up. So this is the detail layer of the leaves, and this is where I'm going to bring in that picked raspberry. Again, just a flat color. So this is what I mean when I said that it made more sense to me to do the leaves first, because those are everywhere. Every one of these images has a leaf. This is the most open area on some of these bigger blooms, and this one I'm using tea dye. That's the lighter of my browns to do this detail layer. This is kind of some buds. This is going to be the gathered twigs. Yes, gathered twigs. This layer is going to be gathered twigs again, because this is the detail layer on those larger blooms, and then it has some buds. So for those buds, I think I'm going to bring back in that tea dye, and I'm bringing in a smaller blending brush just because this is a smaller area, and I'm trying to make sure that I have some contrast and some difference between these. So for the detail layers on a lot of the buds, I did the ground espresso just because I wanted that contrast. And then for some of the blooms and those larger flowers, the detail layer is that gathered twigs. So I'm just going through and ink blending these in. If I didn't feel like I had enough contrast, I would come in and bring those inks again and just apply with a heavier hand. These mini ink blending brushes that I have here, I purchased these off of Amazon, and they hold a tremendous amount of ink. I quite enjoy them. Even though those larger blending brushes I have are larger, they don't hold as much ink as these little mini blending brushes do. I really like them. It was a great purchase. I was very pleased with it. For my sentiment is coming from that same Dahlia stamp set, and I'm just going to use an acrylic block and stamp out "You Are Full of Amazing" or something like that. And I'm going to use the picked raspberry ink to do that. I missed part of the Y on the U, and so I'm just going to get my head in the way. Sorry about that. Don't mind my weird looking face. And line that back up and stamp that out better. Next thing I'm going to do is I ran this through with the coordinating die. What's beautiful about this stamp set and die set is that this is all one die, all one stamp. So when you run it through, you're going to get all of these little images in one pass of your die cut machine, which is a huge time saver. Like I said in the beginning of this video, I was kind of under a time crunch. I was going to do some ink blending for my background, but I had littles that were starting to wake up, and so I had to kind of change my plans a little bit. There is no coordinating die for this sentiment, and if there is, I don't have it. So what I'm doing here is I find that for me personally, if I'm in a fussy cut, which is not my jam, but sometimes, yeah, necessity is there. I find if I outline this with a pencil when I'm going to fussy cut, I get better results. I know that I've seen Christina Werner do this in a previous video, and I was doing this before I watched her video, but it was kind of nice to see, a guru do the same thing I do that I've been doing. just because I feel like I get better results. So then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to fussy cut this out, following along those lines that I just created with my pencil. When you fussy cut, if you keep your scissors straight in your dominant hand and then turn the paper with your non-dominant hand, you'll get cleaner cuts. It'll look more cohesive and just more professional. Like I said, fussy cutting is not my jam. I'm not very good at it. I know that there are some people that I've seen fussy cut and I sit there and I'm like, oh, they cut that out with a die. And then I find out that they actually used fussy cutting to cut it. And I'm so very impressed. So anyway, all I'm doing is following along that little outline and fussy cutting along that outline. And then I'm going to take my pencil eraser and erase any pencil lines that remain after I fussy cut this. So we're going to start building up the card. I made a white card base, which measures 3.5 by 8.5 when it's folded. And then I took this ALINA Craft Co. I purchased this off of Amazon, so I'm not really for sure like the actual name of it or anything. But I cut out a scallop border out of some Paper Studio brown cardstock. And then in order to make kind of like an inlayer or an inset layer, I just cut down a piece of more Paper Studio cardstock to, I think it was like 2 3/4 by 7 3/4, just so that I could get a border. So like I said, I was going to do ink blending, was running out of time. So I went to a medium that I don't give enough love to very often, and those are my Distress Oxide sprays. So all I did was shake the fire out of them, get that ball moving and get that pigment off of the bottom. And then I used KITSCH Flamingo, picked raspberry, and wait for it, walnut stain to create this background here. All I did was spray it and when I was pleased with it, I am going to heat set it. To add some sparkle and shine to this background, I'm going to take Perfect Pearls in the color Perfect Pearls, just put a little bit of that onto this acrylic block here and use that acrylic block with a little bit of water to dilute it down so that I can get some sparkly, shimmery splatters on here. If you wanted to, you could use the mica stains, Distress mica stains from Tim Holtz. You could use a shimmer spritz, whatever you wanted, but this is how I chose to add some sparkle today. In order to clean my block and my brush off, I'm just going to spray it with water, and then I will heat set this one more time just to ensure that all of that splatter is dry. I adhered the brown piece down flat to the card base, and here I'm just arranging my flowers around my sentiment here. I am going to cut off what's hanging over the edges, and I'm going to adhere all of these down flat with some liquid glue. And then I will flip this over, and from the back I will cut off what is hanging over, and I will use those offcuts to fill in the empty spaces on this card front panel. That is a great way to kind of use your leftovers and fill in blank spaces without having to have more images. So here I'm flipping this over and going to trim off the excess. Once I was pleased with the arrangement, I flipped this panel over to the back, and I'm applying Instant Dimension foam tape from Altino all over the back. And then I will adhere this to the middle of the card panel. I did apply some more foam tape to the back of my sentiment and pop that up as well. For the inside, I had this last flower here, and instead of just putting it back in the storage pocket and maybe it never getting used, I'm going to go ahead and adhere that to the inside of the card. I'm trying to be better about putting something in the inside of the card, whether it be a sentiment or some sort of image or remaining die cut or some stenciling, just something on the inside to kind of tie it all together and really finish it off. I know Amy R. from Prairie Paper and Ink does this on every card she makes, and she is a rock star at it. And quite often what she does on the inside of her card would be beautiful as a card front. So I'm trying to be a little bit more and tap into my inner Amy R. and try to finish off the inside of my cards more. But that is it. I toyed with the idea of putting some embellishments on the front, but I really kind of liked how this looked and the dimension it had right now. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and we will see you next time. Bye.